Everyone, Ollie here, and this is my review of The Three Doctors, the first story of the 10th season of classic Doctor Who, starring John Pertwee as the third Doctor, Patrick Troughton as the second Doctor, and William Hartnell as the first Doctor. The Three Doctors is the 65th story overall, it's 4 episodes long, and is written by Bob Baker and Dave Martin. Now that we're in season 10, we're now officially into double figures. Woo! So the Three Doctors is basically the 10th anniversary special of Doctor Who, even though the Three Doctors actually aired shortly after Doctor Who's ninth birthday. So why not bring back the Doctors that came before Pertwee then? So the plot of the story is as follows. The Time Lords are in crisis. A powerful force is draining their energy into a mysterious black hole, and they must recruit a Doctor to save them. But one Doctor isn't enough for this mission. All three of the Doctor's companions, aided by Joe Grant's unit, must face the wrath of Omega, a fallen Time Lord trapped for millennia in the universe of antimatter. Driven mad by his exile, Omega now has one thing on his mind: revenge. Three Doctors. Absolutely marvelous. John Pertwee earns himself another classic. The Three Doctors is actually one of my favorites from the Pertwee era because how iconic it is, and now it's awesome to see Patrick Troughton and William Hartnell back. The production of the story was great. I like the quarry location filming that was used for the antimatter universe where Omega was. And I love the Doctor's new TARDIS exterior. It looks great and it's without a doubt, one of my favourite TARDIS interiors of Doctor Who. And I also like the new Unit HQ set, especially the Doctor's laboratory, and I think it's there throughout the remainder of the Pertwee era. It looked really cool. A Gallifrey makes a return as well as along with the Time Lords, and is actually used more frequently. Yeah, and then actually the Time Lords are actually used more frequently than they were in the War Games and other stories the Time Lords had brief appearances in. And Gallifrey looked great, even though I think it looked like it was set in some sort of control room, but it's still nice to see. The music for this story was actually rather cool, and it did fit in with the story as well. The visuals and the special effects were very well done. I like the little bit of trippy antimatter that was busy stalking the Doctor and Co around on Unit HQ. For the 1970s, it looked great. And I also like the bit at the end of episode 2 when the antimatter consumes the entire Unit HQ, and the unit is actually transported into the black hole universe. That's where the Omega was, and we just see the whole unit building just fade away into the black hole. It looked really cool, and it was very practical as well. And I liked the gel guard costumes. They were bizarre, yes, but for Doctor Who, it looked decent. It was incredible and it was awesome. And I liked how the plot gave reason for the first and second Doctors to return. I would actually say that the Three Doctors is without a doubt one of definitely the best scripts that came from Bob Baker and Dave Martin. And they have really improved since the close of Axos, and the Mutants are, even though it's considered to be a worse story, yeah, but I actually like that story. I think other episodes, the stories that they write, they were okay to the point where it's actually, they either range from okay to just, eh, to be honest. I think my favorite story, apart from the Three Doctors, written by these two, Armageddon Factor from season 16. And this story also marks the end of the Doctor's exile on Earth. When Omega is defeated and the first and second Doctors are returned to their own respective times, the Time Lords decide to forgive the Doctor and return him his dematerialization token for the TARDIS and his memory of the flight codes. And so from this point onwards, the Doctor now has the freedom to travel in time and space without having to do any work for the Time Lords, and that's actually great. A great way to kick off the 10th season by lifting the Doctor's exile, and we definitely do get to see more off-world adventures with the Doctor. Now he doesn't have to do any work for the Time Lords whatsoever, so yay! So seeing as it's a special story, we're bound to have some great iconic moments. My favourite scene from this episode story was when the second Doctor appeared in the third Doctor's TARDIS and the two immediately start bickering, especially when they were trying to explain to Joe who the second Doctor was and who the second Doctor was to the third Doctor, and the two start arguing, immediately followed by the first Doctor showing up in the TARDIS scanner, and he immediately calls the second Doctor a clown, and the third Doctor a dandy. It was a very funny scene, and it's definitely one of the more iconic scenes of the Third Doctor's era, and obviously I like the scene where the Doctor finds out that his exile has been lifted. And another scene that I liked was when the Third Doctor and Joe were transported to the antimatter universe. There's obviously the Second Doctor still in the Third Doctor's TARDIS, and then the Second Doctor leaves the TARDIS, and then the Brigadier comes in, and he just notices that the Second Doctor was there. And you can see the visible confusion on his face. It was pretty funny. I really like that scene. So on to the acting, and the acting I would say is incredible thanks to the awesome scripts and the wonderful direction by Lenny Main, who I would say did a very good job directing the story. So John Pertwee, great as always, definitely one of his best performances as a Third Doctor in this story. Despite I think the fact he had an issue with Charlton and his tendency to ad lib his lines, I think they did kind of like clash a bit, but I think they did genuinely enjoy working together. As you can see with the way they were bickering, it looked really funny, and as if they were just an old married couple, and I do think they did enjoy working together, and especially any form of rivalry was like played up whenever they were in the when they were in conventions before they both unfortunately died. And I think there's one picture online where I think it was Pertwee chasing Troughton with a water jug. And also like the fact how the Third Doctor was very protective of Joe, despite the fact him seeing his past selves and him being caught up in the antimatter universe. Patrick Troughton was great as the Second Doctor, and honestly, it's so good seeing him back after his emotional exit in the War Games. And it was as if he never left. He just goes on with it, and it's just amazing, man. And actually do wish Jamie was in this story with the Second Doctor, but it wouldn't. But at the same time, it wouldn't really work. Pertwee did say that if they brought back a lot of characters, it would have distracted viewers from the plot, and that is an example of bad fan service. Also, Fraser Hines was busy working on Emmerdale Farm, which is now called Emmerdale, which had only started around the time the Three Doctors had aired. Charlton still did a very good job, and I like the fact that he temporarily took over from whatever was going on while the Third Doctor and Joe were in the world of Omega, giving us some good scenes with Benton and the Brigadier as well. And I'm glad that Patrick Charlton does actually return for two more multi-doctor stories, and that's the Five Doctors with Peter Davison and the Two Doctors with Colin Baker. Both stories, well, I like the Two Doctors more than the Five Doctors, but I'll get to that on another day. And I'm glad that Patrick Charlton was able to return for those two stories. And finally, we have William Hartnell as the First Doctor. Even though Hartnell was really ill and made sporadic appearances throughout, giving the Second and the Third Doctors plus a Time Lord advice, he was still well utilized despite his illness. I like the fact that he pretty much had to. His wife said that he couldn't really do any of the heavy lifting, so he pretty much had to appear on screen on this in the story when Hartnell was just basically reading off the cue cards, and that was a very good way to use the First Doctor. And I think in the story they explained that he was trapped in the time eddy, so he couldn't really be able to help the doctors as much as he could, and he was just there to give advice here and there, and that was a great way to use the First Doctor. And unfortunately, this just goes to show that how William Hartnell is dedicated to play how he was dedicated to playing the Doctor, considering the fact that he was the one that started the show, and it was a great way to see him used back because other actors, I'm sure they would have turned it down if they were unwell. Unfortunately, this is William Hartnell's final performance as the First Doctor, as he dies 2 years after the story aired. The First Doctor does return in the 20th anniversary special, which is the Five Doctors, and he was played by Richard Herndon. And I think Herndon actually died shortly after the Five Doctors as well. and the First Doctor actually returns in Peter Capaldi's final story, Twice Upon a Time, which story I'm not really too keen on. But still, William Hartnell did a very good job, even though I actually liked how they were able to use the First Doctor in the story, despite how William Hartnell's illness. So he did get some good dialogue thanks to the amazing script. So, yay! And now we have Katie Manning as Jo. Unfortunately, she doesn't really have a whole lot to do in the story because this story is mainly about the Three Doctors plus Omega. I still liked her performance, and I think she still did her best. And unfortunately, season 10 is also Katie Manning's final season as Jo, so we do get to see a great deal of great performances in her final stories. Family members. Now on to the Brigadier, played by Nicholas Courtney, and he was great as the Brigadier as always, and he does actually play a vital part in this story for the first time since, let's say, the Demons, because he didn't really have a whole much to do in his previous stories, especially in season 9. But the Brigadier actually has his first unintended TARDIS trip when the antimatter actually carries his entire unit headquarters into Omega's world, and as I mentioned before, his reaction to seeing the Second Doctor was pretty hilarious, and this story is without a doubt one of the best performances from Nicholas Courtney as the Brigadier. Captain Yates is conspicuous in his absence, but he does return in the Green Death, but Benton is there to pretty much carry the unit family, and he does great, considering the fact that he was actually given Jimmy's intended lines, and it was actually pretty obvious as well, because Benton isn't really that talkative compared to Jamie, and Benton is actually doesn't really talk a whole lot in other stories compared to the Three Doctors. And I liked Benton's moments when he actually entered the Third Doctor's TARDIS, and then he looked puzzled, and then the Doctor's gonna say, "Well, what you going to say? Is it bigger on the inside and the outside?" And Benton was like, "Well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it?" And Benton does well in this story, and I would actually say this story is actually John Levine's best performance as Benton. Considering for counting Inferno, I think he had definitely one of his best performances. So, good job to John Levine. So, on to our side characters. Other than the Time Lords that were in Gallifrey, they were okay. So, the other two characters that were pretty much in the part of the story was Dr. Tyler. He was a scientist that was transported into Omega's world by accident. The Third Doctor and Joe find him in Omega's lair. He was an interesting character. I think the Doctor actually called him Professor Tyler if Tyler was just pissing the Doctor off. So we also had Arthur Orles. He was the warden of a nearby wildlife sanctuary. He also has a wife as well, who is also funny, but she doesn't really have a big part to play in this story. I think she appears in the beginning and she appears at the very end of the Three Doctors. Dr. Tyler asked him to get a monitoring device, and he ends up in Omega's world as well, and he does a good job as well, and I liked him. The fact that these two are the only side characters that were there was a good call. Too many side characters would probably ruined the story and the story's progression. And now we have our villain, our big bad in Omega. He was an epic villain, so a little backstory of Omega. He was one of the legendary figures of Gallifrey and one of the co-founders of the Time Lord Society. He became the first person to live in Antimatter universe because I think he was removed from Gallifrey, and because he started going mad and all that, and he pretty much used his will to build an Antimatter universe, and I like the scene where it was revealed that underneath Omega's suit there was just pretty much nothing. There was just nothing there, and it was revealed that Omega's will was pretty much keeping him alive, and that was pretty darn scary. And Stephen Thorne played Omega very well, and Omega is definitely one of the greatest villains of Doctor Who, or especially in the Third Doctor's era, and Omega does actually return 10 seasons later in Arc of Infinity in season 20, and that's a Peter Davison season. So I look forward to seeing Omega there because I haven't seen this Arc of Infinity as of yet. Personally, I don't really think this story has any distinct faults other than how Joe was used, but it's not really that distinct. But yeah, it's still a fantastic story. No distinct faults other than how Joe was used. So yay! So to conclude this review, The Three Doctors is a great way to kick off the 10th season of and the 10th anniversary of Doctor Who, creating a tradition of the sorts by having multi-Doctor stories for the anniversary years, and this story was a brilliant end to the Doctor's exile era, and that was brilliant. Great script, great direction by Lenny Mayne, awesome dialogue, very nostalgic, good to see the Doctors back. The Three Doctors is definitely a perfect 10 out of 10. So my next review will be The Carnival of Monsters, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching this review. Please let me know what you thought of the story and this review itself, and please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. And I'm also now on Discord, so I will post the link of the Discord server on description below. So until then, see you later.